Welcome to the Low Carb MD Podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting-edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor.
Hello and welcome to the Low Carb MD Podcast. Tro is out fighting with Lane Norton this morning doing a charity event, a debate. So I have my trusty partner here, Kristen Bear. Dr. Kristen Bear, welcome.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, awesome, having fun. My partner in crime here in San Diego. And we are joined today by a doc who we had on before, who has the crazy job of helping doctors to lose weight. She has a great podcast called Weight Solution for Physicians, family medicine, obesity medicine trained doc. Siobhan Key, welcome. Great to have you back.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to be back.
It's always great. And you know, we were kind of talking offline a little bit. I got to do your podcast recently, and it's awesome. I mean, it's amazing what you're doing because you're helping doctors to lose weight, and then they can help their patients along the way. So each of those doctors on average is going to have 2,000 patients. And so the amount of reach you can have is fantastic. And so tell people what you're doing and how you got into this realm, because of all the patients, doctors are the worst patients to have.
I actually think they're awesome. So how I got here was I struggled with my weight, like starting in med school, right? Third year med school with being on call, fast food and hospital cafeterias, and then residency. It never felt like you actually had time to cook, nor did you actually have energy to do it. And so fast food and junk food and eating out became my norm. And I gained a lot of weight, and I developed habits that then turned out to be really hard to get rid of. And so as a practicing physician, I knew what I should be eating. I knew what would be healthy. Like, I obviously knew fast food wasn't healthy. I went through 2 pregnancies and had gestational diabetes in both. So I knew if I didn't change something, diabetes was kind of heading down the path to me. And yet I couldn't stop eating the food. Like, I struggled and struggled. I had all these intentions, and yet busy days, stressful days, being on call, I would still, like, it felt compulsive in the way that I couldn't actually stop eating the food. And so I just started looking for better solutions. And some of this was looking for myself, and some was realizing what I was actually taught in medical school about weight loss didn't work for most of my patients. And so that's where I found the obesity medicine tract, is to just try to educate myself better about the science of weight loss. And so I started doing obesity medicine. And the interesting thing is things got better, and I found low carb, and I was eating lower carb. And overall, my eating was better, my weight came down. But there was still this element of, when my brain got really stressed, it would go to food. And so I was eating low carb most of the time. Like, I was eating low carb until I wasn't. And what I realized, and at the time I was also doing obesity medicine with groups, and realizing people were also having that issue. Like, low carb worked great for a number of people that could just do it and do it, period. But there was an element of, how do you actually help people stick to it? And so that's where I kept trying to figure out solutions. And I actually found life coaching, and became certified as a life coach. And it was the life coaching tools that clicked in and made that difference for me to understand not just what I should be eating, but why I was eating what I was, and how I could actually change that simply. And so that's where I started doing coaching for physicians through the Weight Solutions for Physicians, because I know that these tools work, and they don't require all the willpower that we currently are using. Like, when I think of how much energy I spent on my own weight over those years, and just kind of struggling with those cravings, it was huge. And it doesn't have to actually take that much energy. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is some tweaks and stuff that makes it simpler and lets it, if you truly understand why you're eating in the first place, then you can fix it at the root source. And then the food craving itself actually fades away. The problem we run into is we get overly focused on just what we're eating and just trying not to eat certain foods.
I think that's such a great point. We spend so much time focusing our weight loss efforts on the foods that we should or shouldn't be eating. And quite often the emotional and psychological components are neglected. So I think it's great you're trying to help people really identify that through life coaching. What are some of your top tips or tweaks that you wanted to talk about in terms of how people can overcome the why behind what they're doing and why they're making the choices they are when it comes to eating?
Yeah, so what I was thinking we could talk about, or what I like to talk about, is kind of the concept of emotional eating and what it is, because I think it's misunderstood. A lot of times when people hear emotional eating, they picture somebody sitting on a couch crying into a bucket of ice cream, because that's what movies show it to be, right? But there's such a realm of what emotional eating. And then on the end of that spectrum of emotional eating, there's also binge eating. And I think it's really important to talk about binge eating, because it's something that a lot of people who have binge eating behavior never ever actually tell anybody about it. And it can be a big barrier to, like, if you're following a low carb diet but you have binge eating, then again you're following a low carb diet and then you're having these episodes where you're eating large amounts of food, feeling really out of control when it's happening, and feeling really upset and defeated and things like that afterwards. And that can get in your way. Like, that amount of inconsistency, if you're trying to lose weight, makes a big difference. And because one of the hallmarks, as you know, with obesity medicine, the definition of binge eating is that, like, shame and regret that happens after the eating. And so it holds people in silence. And with my work with physicians, a lot of physicians struggle with binge eating, and yet they maybe never recognize that that's what it is when we talk, or they know that's what it is, but they've never told anybody about it. And it makes it so hard to get help if you can't talk about it.
Yeah, I think especially for physicians, because we're under a severe amount of stress. Some physicians, and I just gave a talk on physician burnout, and I was staggered by the numbers. That's a huge problem. And so when you either turn to food, drugs, whatever it is to escape, physicians are probably at higher risk than the general population of this, even though we know a lot. We think we know a lot. I knew I was working out, 6 days a week and eating 6 small meals throughout the day and having green shakes, gaining weight. And I thought there's something wrong here, right? And then I heard Jason Fung and changed my life when I realized, oh my goodness, maybe Melba toast and rice crackers not the way to go. But and even the great Dr. Unwin talks about that. He says, certain patients, he would look at his list and say, oh, he calls them biscuits, but cookies to us Americans. And he go, I need 3 cookies to deal with this patient, right? Because it's the stress that was brought on. So this constant stress we're under definitely contributes to this binge eating and how we deal with our emotions.
Totally. The way I think about emotionally eating, so the definition I use is emotional eating is kind of any eating that's not done directly for physical hunger. And that's a big umbrella, but it encompasses positive situations too, which some people don't recognize as emotional eating. So like you go, obviously this doesn't happen as much right now during COVID, but like you go out with friends on Friday night for dinner, and the celebration, the fact it's Friday, you end up overeating, or you eat food you wouldn't normally eat. That's a version of emotional eating. And I explain emotional eating as it's your brain trying to solve a problem with food that food can't solve. And so when we focus only on the food, we're missing the point, because we're missing the problem. The food is a symptom. It's not the actual issue. And yet in diet culture, in those settings, we're told just focus on what you're eating. Like if you're eating, say the classic would be like you're trying to eat low carb, you go through your busy day, you're staying pretty low carb, and then you get home, eat dinner, sit on the couch, and you all of a sudden the popcorn and the chips come out and they feel like you have no choice. The issue there isn't the popcorn or chips, and yet that's what we often focus on. Like we beat ourselves up because we're suddenly eating things that aren't low carb. The issue is stuff that actually happened earlier in the day. And the beauty of this is when you look back and you figure out what the drivers are, then the food craving itself just fades away.
So what are some tips you have to help handle these emotional episodes of eating. I see it all the time in clinic. Patients are like, I'm fine all day. I can fast. I can maybe have a good low carb dinner. Then 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock hits, and I just cannot resist the temptation to snack. And I want to reach for something, and it might be low carb still, but it might be something that's traditionally seen as a comfort food, like macadamia nuts or cheese or something else like that. So I think breaking those habits is hard, but it's absolutely necessary for sustained weight loss.
Totally. So one of the things I often start with, particularly if it's evening eating, and that's an issue for tons of people. So one of the issues I start with is actually eating more earlier in the day, because what a lot of people will do is say you tend towards evening eating, you eat stuff you didn't plan on, you eat some carby stuff in the evening, and then what's the first thing you think of when you wake up in the morning? You're like, I got to get back on track. I got to like be extra careful. Like that was a mistake. I'm going to, just get back to it. But what a lot of people do is they swing too far into the restrictive. And in the mornings, we have all our willpower. So we've got energy. The stress of the day hasn't built up. We've, got focus. We've got decision-making capacity. So it's relatively easy to eat less earlier in the day. But then sometimes what that means is by the evening, you have hunger hormones. Now, so hunger hormones being ghrelin mainly. So by the evening, you might find there's a hormonal drive, like a biological drive to eat. The interesting thing to add into this would be fasting, right? Because fasting is a great tool for weight loss. And yet it's kind of the opposite of what I'm saying. And my personal approach when I'm working with people about fasting is usually we try to stabilize the appetite. We stabilize the eating first and do some of the thought work and cognitive behavioral therapy stuff, and then put fasting in. Because sometimes for some people, the fasting can contribute to kind of a binge restrict cycle where you find when you fast, because you've got that decision-making capacity and the willpower. But then when you start to eat again, you have, some people, when they're fasting, kind of think about the food the whole time, right? Like you're fasting, and I used to do this. And this is when fasting didn't work for me, is you're fasting, but you're thinking, okay, when can I eat? And what am I going to eat? And all those thoughts actually build desire in your head. And then also if you have thoughts about being kind of deprived, like, oh, look at me, I'm skipping lunch, I'm not eating lunch. And it kind of builds a sort of desire for food and a bit of deprivation that can trigger more eating when you actually eat. So when you break your fast, your brain can be like, oh, finally, like we've been deprived for so long. Now we're eating. Let's eat. Let's do it right. Versus if you can work on your thoughts and be in a place where when you're fasting, you're just okay about it. Like there's not the thoughts about food or not the thoughts about what you're not eating. You're just, it's kind of more neutral. And then feeling neutral about breaking that fast, often from a thought perspective, you're in a better position to then just eat what you planned and eat your low carb food and not overeat after the fast.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot too with patients. Fasting is not for everyone, and it's interesting. I usually have come from it from a perspective of, oh, they're not fat adapted yet. We need to give them more time to adjust to a low carb diet. But that's a great point that we probably need to do a better job of addressing the psychological component and retraining habits, because I've seen people gain weight fasting, right? They think about food constantly. It actually breaks their focus because they're so obsessed with when they're going to eat again. I shouldn't say obsessed, but it's just an all-consuming thought. And then they end up way overeating when that fasting period ends. So I think that's a really great strategy. We have to possibly delay fasting until when they're fat adapted, until we've addressed the underlying causes of what's causing them to eat excessively at night.
Yeah. And I find that to be really helpful to take that approach. As you know, once you're fat adapted, the appetite piece, the hunger piece goes away. But the piece that can still remain is that stress piece, like that the way I think about evening eating is often it's as we go through our days, we accumulate these stresses. And we generally, particularly as physicians, we don't take time during the day to process that stress in any way. Like most of us, your days start early, maybe you're rounding, you're getting to the clinic, you're running behind, you have to keep going. And then there's some fit-ins. So over lunch, you kind of see a couple fit-ins, and then the rest of the time you're madly doing notes and getting lab work processed. And then it's the afternoon patients again, right? And it's this continuing thing. And then for a lot of my clients, at least, who a lot of them are mothers, then you like hop in your vehicle, you madly run to the daycare to get the kid before you get the warning letters, and then run home, try to feed them quickly and get them out the door for activities. And so it's like this constant like stress throughout the day. So the first time you actually have to relax is once the kids are in bed and you sit down on the couch to watch Netflix, and your brain is like, whoa, what happened? Like, what can we do? We need to do something fast, and we're exhausted to feel better because like this didn't feel good, but it's the first time you've actually processed it truly. And so it makes total sense that our brains turn to food, because it is correct that food feels better for our brains, right? That food, the processed food, gives us dopamine, which does feel good. The problem is a part of our brain that gives us the food cravings doesn't think long term. So it doesn't see that it feels good for, the few minutes that you're actually eating the food. And then afterwards, you're still stressed. It just sees that it gets that momentary relief. And I think that's a good explanation as to why, you can have the one thing and then you're like, okay, now I need something more. Like, I'm not actually hungry, but I need something more, because your brain's like, okay, that helped, but the problem isn't totally fixed. So let's try again. Let's keep trying. But the problem that your brain doesn't recognize, or that part of your brain doesn't recognize, is that the food can't completely fix that. So that opens up a big question, right? Of like, okay, so how do you actually change that? Like, if you're busy and you've got a lot of demands on your time, how do you actually change all that stress that happens through the day?
And I think it's addressing our coping mechanism. One of my patients lost 18 pounds, and I said, what the heck did you do? He said, it's the dumbest thing, doc. He said, I used to get home from work, and while my wife was making dinner, we'd talk, and I would have some chips and crackers and snacks and a drink. And he gained all this weight, and he was annoyed. So he said, when I get home, instead, let's go for a walk around the block. So he said, I go for a walk, and he said, I'm not straining myself, but he's away from the food. And he says, hi, Tom, his neighbors. He said, I love it. And my stress goes down. So, different things like that. He just changed his habit. That's all he did, really, right? Is change that one habit of the food he was eating before dinner, and got outside and did stuff.
Yeah. And I think, that too, that walk, that's a great example, because that walk then would have let him process some of the stresses from the day, so that when he did sit down at home, his brain's like, okay, we've dealt with some of that. We're not quite in the same panic mode. So the things I usually talk to people about, number one is there is so much we can do with managing how we're thinking through a day. Like, when we encounter these stressful situations, the situation isn't really what causes the internal stress. It's our thoughts about the situation. So me being behind in the office and knowing that there's people waiting for me for more than a half hour, that on its own doesn't cause stress. It's my thoughts about it that, I need to catch up, and I'm not going to get my notes done, and everybody's going to be upset. It's those thoughts that create the actual stress. And so if you can learn to watch what you're thinking and modify your thoughts, even just slightly, it actually brings down your stress a ton.
That's a great point. And I just want to point out how difficult it can be to change your thought process. What are some techniques you've discovered that have helped your clients change their mindset and change the way they're perceiving certain situations?
Yeah, so it takes being intentional about it. It takes developing some sort of routine for you to examine your thoughts, because when you're not doing this, these thoughts happen just reflexively, and they feel factual and they feel true in your mind. Like, I spent years in that exact example of feeling behind and feeling like those thoughts just felt like factual statements of my day. And so I really encourage people to do some form of journaling where you actually write down the thoughts that you're going around in your mind, because I think of it like when we try to think of what we're thinking in our brains without writing it down, it's like they're on a slippery surface and they're constantly moving away from you and you can't quite get traction with them. When you actually write them down on paper, then it becomes something concrete that you can actually look at and go, okay, if I spend my day thinking that, how do I actually feel? And is that how I want to feel? Because the interesting thing is how we feel changes how we act. So in my example, which that thought process was a big one for me that I had to work on to get my nemesis, which was Wendy's French fry cravings, under control, was working on what I was thinking during busy office days. And so when I got into that stress, what's interesting is all your actions actually change. So you start becoming more inefficient because you go into kind of like a brain swirl, forward thinking about all the work that's still to be done, which means you're not actually attending as well in the office visits. You're not as efficient. You're not getting your notes done. And so it becomes a snowball that keeps going. So you can, if you write it down, you can look at, okay, how does this make me feel? And then how do I show up when I'm feeling that way? And then you can go, okay, is there something else that I could think in the same situation that's still believable? So it's not about finding a thought that just is so far-fetched that you don't even believe it, but something that's believable but makes me feel just slightly better. So for me, in that example, the thought that I use now is everything that needs to be done will get done. And that, like, I feel so much calmer and more centered. So when I catch myself, and the way I know that I'm getting into that is I feel just a little bit of tightness in my chest. And I've practiced this enough that when I start to feel that, I check in and I'm like, no, it's okay. Everything that needs to get done is going to get done. That lets me focus down. I stay more efficient, and I actually sometimes get more, like even more efficient, meaning I catch up on the stuff that I was starting to worry I'd be behind on. But it does take practicing it intentionally, like, and making time for it. But it doesn't have to be a huge amount of time. Like 5 minutes of scribbling on a piece of paper can go a long way in figuring out what your thoughts are doing for you.
Yeah, I think we see that clinically with patients who come in stressed, blood pressure's high, and they'll sit there for a couple minutes and just breathe and relax, and boom, their blood pressure drops back down. And I think a lot of us as physicians forget that. Just take 5 minutes and give thanks, or write down something good in life, because for 17 years, I mean, as a matter of fact, I just had a talk yesterday with our office manager, Mary, the mom of Jack, who does our editing. She goes, Brian, I think you're still kind of living a little bit in your old life, because when I get a bunch of calls all at once, it stresses me out. Because before, I could never, like you're saying, it was like I was on a treadmill that was just a little too fast for me. I knew I could keep up today, but long term, because I really do feel for doctors, and I get it, because if you're seeing a patient every 8 minutes, it's brutal. It's like you get a little behind and you are done for the rest of the day. Now in our practice, like yesterday, someone showed up 15 minutes late, no big deal, because I scheduled a ton of time for that patient. So we can adjust for that. But when you have 8 minutes, someone comes 2 minutes late, it messes up your schedule. So I think if there's that, and plus doctors are under the pressures of performing, and unfortunately, because of reimbursement, we're seeing more and more patients and can't provide adequate care. So you go into this job to help everyone, and then all of a sudden you realize the patient becomes your nemesis at some point, right? Because they're calling and bugging you, and you got to return calls and do disability paperwork. And so the huge pressures doctors are under is just unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Like, I've taken care of docs, and I look at like ulcers and headaches and back pain and neck pain and all this stuff that's related to stress. It is really devastating, but a lot of them are going to turn to alcohol. And I've seen that: alcohol, drugs, whatever it is, to try to escape, even video games, just so they don't have to deal with reality. But the reality is they've had a stressful day hearing everyone's problems all day. And then they get home and, honey, the printer's not working. Can you fix this? The garbage disposal is making a noise. And you think, gosh, dang, I just want to, like, I've had times where I just said, let me just have 5 minutes just to myself. I used to have a half-hour drive to down regulate everything. But yeah, it's really hard, especially ER docs and people who are under major stress. And even ER docs, I used to be jealous of them, because even though they have a stressful job, they get a lot of downtime, because there's no way you could do that job, 5 days a week or 7 days a week. So they have shorter shifts. But us internal medicine docs, you have a lot of responsibilities and family responsibilities and, you know, those kind of things. And it's really a burden.
And, you know, I think that brings up a good point in that we as physicians are caregivers. And so we have a tendency to care for everybody else before we care for ourselves. Like, you know, we'll stay late at the office doing those last phone calls instead of going for the run we had planned, right? We'll, you know, we have to, it's by nature of our job, we do have to do that. And that we have to, if we're on call and we get called, we have to go back to the hospital no matter what's happening in our personal life. But it is at a detriment to our health, which is why I think physician burnout rates are so high. And this is partly why I love this coaching approach to weight loss, is because we're actually working on the root issues and we're working on changing them simply, like just by working on our thoughts. Everything else gets better. So, you know, we're working on our thoughts early in the day so we don't eat in the evening, but then it actually makes the day better. So the reason why we don't eat in the evening is because everything went well and we had a great day. And so what I see with my physician coaching clients is, yeah, weight improves and eating improves and all that. And there's, you know, less shame and things that they carry about their eating before. But then also, you know, their relationships improve. They enjoy work better. They're able to find time for themselves. They feel, you know, more engaged with their kids and less irritable with the kids. Like it's treating the coaching approach by the nature of emotional eating. We end up treating the person as a whole, which I think is great. And I think one of the points I was going to make too is to care for ourselves. Again, it doesn't have to be huge chunks of time, like you're saying, 5 minutes. And I often talk to people about micro breaks. Like in a super busy day, are there micro breaks you could build in for yourself so that you don't actually get to that, you know, 6 o'clock dinner time and just feel completely depleted? And so would that be, you know, doing a meditation at your desk? Would it be like just going for a 5-minute walk, turning on some music and just listening to some music, keeping a novel in your bag so you take like 5 minutes and just read a novel just to kind of give yourself that little micro reset time? And I think those can be really powerful. And often, again, if you take that little break for yourself, you may find that you're more efficient when you come back. So we worry that we don't have time for it, but what if taking that break actually created more time?
I agree with that completely. I started meditation maybe about a year ago now, and I thought at first it was a stressor, like how am I going to find 15 minutes twice a day to fit in this meditation? And it actually does make you much more efficient. Just having that little break, early afternoon, divide up your day, and you come back for your afternoon patients completely recharged, and you can focus a lot better as well. I think that's hugely beneficial. I'd say meditation and journaling have been very helpful in terms of stress management. And it was very apparent when my mom even pointed out, you seem a lot more calm and less stressed. What are you doing these days? Because I felt my stress was going down with the implementation of meditation, and that other people around me started noticing it really confirmed that it was working.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Trust
Yeah,
moms to notice, hey?
I think, you know, because honestly, when I look back at my life, at my old practice compared to now, I had no time to really, like, if someone wanted to show me pictures of their grandkids, I'm thinking, crud, I got 22 people to call back. I really don't care about your grandkids right now, really, because you're thinking how much stuff you have to do all the time. So it's really hard for us to really take a break, because you feel like, okay, like for me, like it's funny, in my old, this is pretty sad, but in my old practice, I went out to lunch maybe one time in 17 years with a friend, like just take a lunch, because I knew if I took that hour at lunchtime, I'd be working an extra hour that night, not getting home till 9:30 or 10 at night. So I knew I was taking time from my family. So I had to look and say, hey, let's do stuff on the weekend. But the weekend I was catching up from the week before and trying to get ready for the next week. And it was always hoping that the next week would be better. And it was always busier and harder, because when you have 2,000 patients, it's unmanageable. It really is. So I think that's part of it too, is that our time is so valuable that we forget to take it. We just don't take it, because if I go for a walk for 20 minutes, I know that's adding on to the end of my day, right? So it's hard. It's really hard for a lot of the young docs that get in, and for my situation was I wanted to prove myself. So I said, I'll work harder than everyone. And I did but it never stopped for 17 years. It just kept going.
Exactly.
And at some point you say, I gotta, and the other thing was, is sad to say, but it's true, because I was in my own practice. If I took a week off, it would take me a month before I left and 6 weeks after I got back to catch up on the patient burden, because my partners were so busy, they couldn't help me either. So you realize wanting to provide patient care and being compassionate is brutal, because you have to take away from your personal life in order to do that, at that level. So we really do have to reform medicine, and I think direct primary care, doing what we're doing. Chris and I, like when I get home now, my wife says, how was your day? And I go, oh my gosh, it was awesome. Guess what? We did this. Kristen did this with her patient. And I have stories that are great, right? Before I was like, how was your day? Brutal. I mean, I still got 12 phone calls to make, and so that constant stress, and I'm a pretty low, Kristen knows I'm a pretty low stress guy in general, but when you're under constant stress all the time, it does affect your brain for sure. And along those lines, my scariest patient for me now is the one who's obsessed with the weight part of it, because they're the ones who won't lose weight. It's crazy, but if you weigh yourself 4 times a day, the stress of that, I think, has something to do with it. I have other people that go, yeah, I want to be healthy, but I don't care about the weight. And they lose 30 pounds in the first month. It's ridiculous. So, I would love to hear your thoughts on that if you've seen the same thing.
Oh, totally. The scale, I call it scale drama, right? Because when you look at it from a thought perspective and look at, okay, what happens when we step on the scale? That number is neutral, right? Like it's gravitational pull on Earth. It doesn't actually mean anything. And yet we then have thoughts that assign a whole lot of meaning to it. And, the thoughts that we have about that scale number can ruin your entire week, or it can make you feel really good, which is partly why, if people are finding success, then they keep weighing themselves because they're looking for, it's almost like a hit from the scale, like that, okay, I'm doing well. The problem is when we are letting the scale have that power over us, it changes our behavior, right? So the classic would be, and I'm going to use the same scale number because I think it's a really good example of it's not the number that matters. So say somebody steps on the scale and sees 200 and they think, crap, I can't believe I've crossed the 200 line. How did I get here? I've completely failed. I'm messing up so much. People probably actually say worse to them. I'm editing it a little bit about what we would, because we say horrible stuff to ourselves, right? So then, you feel completely defeated. You feel like a failure. So what's your eating going to be like that day? When you have opportunities, when donuts show up at the office, are you going to say no from a place of self-compassion and just being okay with not eating the donut? Probably not. Either you're going to eat the donut because you're going to say, screw it, the horse is out of the barn, I've messed up already. Or you won't eat the donut, but you'll be using so much willpower and from a kind of negative beating yourself up, I don't deserve the donut because of what that number was. And so your whole day gets ruined, plus your eating gets thrown off track. And I talk about micro inconsistencies because sometimes the ways your eating gets thrown off track that ultimately affect how the scale moves are they're micro. You don't notice the individual little inconsistencies, it's the little nibbles here, the little extra sips and stuff, and yet those add up. Our brains are fantastic editors, so they edit it out when you look back at your day. You're like, oh, I ate low carb all day. It doesn't register all the little extras, but they can add up enough where the scale doesn't move. Now, if we look on the flip side, somebody steps on the scale, sees 200 and thinks, finally, I'm at 200. I can't believe I made it. If somebody started at 280, 200, it's what is it called? Wonderland that people call it once you're below 200. And they think, fantastic, I'm here. They feel elated, celebratory. But then interestingly, that can end up with eating as well. Because, you're like, I did it. It's great. And so then later in the day, when the donuts show up at the office, same situation, you can have thought patterns. Well, I deserve it. Look, this one won't matter. I've done so well so far, so I'll have this donut. And so it's really interesting in that both sides of that scale drama, the thought processes about the scale, can influence what your weight ultimately does. And so I talk a lot with my clients about the scale being neutral, letting it being a data point. So you step on the scale and you're like, that's a data point. And you and I talked, Brian, about you guys using like the remote monitoring where you get nice trends of everything, because it's the trend that matters. It's not the individual variations from day to day or individual variations throughout the day. But our brains can get so obsessed with that.
And I think a lot of it is mindset. I have people who it's a struggle because they're like, I couldn't have cookies, I couldn't have this. Other people, oh, I love it because I'm making food and they enjoy the journey, not just looking at that end point. Because people will ask me, when's the end point? I'm like, how long are you going to live?
There is no end.
There's no end, because this isn't a diet where you just want to look good for the wedding. This is a lifestyle. And like you've said, watching the stress, getting enough sleep, all these things are so critical to your success. Just as a side note of what you were saying, I just had a patient yesterday and she's had some struggles. And she said, Doc, guess what I figured out? I said, what? She goes, I got Invisaligns because I'm at home anyways. So they're like a retainer type thing to keep your teeth straight. And she said, now because every time I eat, I have to take it out and clean it and do all this stuff. She goes, I never realized how much I was snacking. I never registered that. And another good friend of mine lost a ton of weight because he had a oral surgery and he had to wear this thing. And so it was more of a hassle than have to take this thing out and clean it and do all this stuff. So snacking was such a hassle. They said, I'll just wait till I eat dinner. And he lost like 22 pounds just doing that. So we don't realize those little break off a piece of the donut, break off a little cookie, that all that stuff adds up over time. Right. Absolutely. So, those are just, I just thought that was interesting. Where she realized, oh, I'm snacking all the time. I realize it now because it's a hassle for me now. Because most of the time we just don't register in our brain that we're doing that.
Yeah. And I like to think of our brains as being a little bit manipulative, because really at the core of it, our brain wants the dopamine, right? So it's in that part of our brain's best interest to just edit stuff out for you. To be like, it's okay, honey. You've been really good so far. You could have this extra bite. And then, a few hours later, no, it's okay. You've been really good. You could have this extra bite. And it's not that people are, intentionally not recognizing that. It's that's how our brains behave, is they edit when it's in their best interest. The flip side of that, right, is that the next day or, whatever, sometimes our brains just focus on everything you did wrong. Like it looks back when the scale doesn't move in the way you want, then the brain's looking back at the little bites of the donut and beating you the heck up about those little bites of donuts. Brains are so fascinating. Like it's really interesting how our thought patterns go. But I agree with you. Mindset is everything. Like you were talking about, I talk about deprivation versus abundance. And this is one of the things I use for my clients that have binge eating and my obesity medicine patients that have binge eating, because the core of binge eating is binge restrict. So you have a binge, you eat lots out of control. The next morning you restrict and you restrict. And generally while you're restricting, you're having thoughts about, I'm restricting, I'm not getting enough. I wish I could eat everything. I wish I could eat like normal people. And then at some point that boils over and you have another binge. So what I talk about is the opposite of restriction is abundance. So I can go through a day eating low carb, thinking about all the bread and pasta I'm not eating. But what will that do for me emotionally? Like I will feel deprived. I will feel restricted. I'll feel very unhappy. Or I can go through the day thinking about all the fantastic low carb food I get to eat. Like the fact I can go to a restaurant and order hot wings with basically no guilt, compared to the years and years that I did Weight Watchers where I felt super guilty every time I ordered hot wings. And that makes me feel more abundant in my eating choices. And it's so much easier to do this long term if you're feeling abundant about what you're eating.
I think that's a great point too. And just acknowledging that this is a lifestyle. It's not a temporary quick fix for a diet, and how you think about it is really going to make all the difference, especially for long-term sustainability and success, and getting to focus on the positives of what you can eat and how you're going to feel and the energy that comes with it and the confidence, all of that piles on together. And I think a recurrent theme you keep mentioning is the emotional eating. We eat to celebrate. We eat when we're upset. We eat based upon a number on the scale. And I have a few patients that have been really stressed, and they admit, weekends come and I just want to eat. It's my way to unwind. It's harder to stay on track. And I ask them, well, what do you do for stress management? What do you do for fun? What kind of hobbies do you have? And it's amazing how many people pause and they really have to think. They don't know. Food has become their stress relief. And I think finding other outlets to relieve that stress is hugely important. And in addition to journaling and meditating, I think just having people find new hobbies, go back to things that they used to enjoy, and realize they can take a break from the work. The work is going to be there in an hour. You can take that time away.
And I think that's a really good point, in that if food's been your coping strategy, just like if alcohol's been your coping strategy, if you take it away, you have to learn other coping strategies. And so, as you guys know, when they first start eating low carb, there's almost like a panic period where it feels so uncomfortable that you're no longer eating the carbs, because they were a lot more than just food to you. They were the way you managed your stress, the way you celebrated. And it's a learning curve. And so I often talk to people about, like, you have to be compassionate with yourself. You have to be constantly kind of learning, okay, how do I find these new coping strategies? And sometimes they're not going to feel good right off the bat, right? Like, going for a walk isn't going to feel as good as a donut at the beginning, but with time and practice, it does. And eventually going for a walk actually feels better than the donut. But if for anybody, if you're just starting a lower carb diet and you're in this, just know that it's a learning curve and it'll take you some time, but you just have to keep practicing. And I actually encourage people to write things down, like brainstorm a whole list of all the other stuff you could do instead of eating to feel better in stress management, because in the moment, your brain will just tell you it's just food. Food's the only option that's going to make you feel better. And so having a list posted on your fridge can be really helpful, that you can be like, okay, I'm going to try this, and then I'm going to try the next one on the list, and then the next one. But I remember personally, trying to remember when it was in my life, I think it was when my son, my third kid, was really little, and I hired my first life coach, and I was saying to him, I just want to have fun. Like, there's no fun in my life and I want to have fun. And he said, okay, well, what would be fun? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I couldn't come up with anything that was fun. Like, my life was work, kids, bed, and that was it. And I lost all those activities that were actually me, that were fun. Food was, I think, what was fun for me. And that's why I had such issues.
Yeah, I think we have so much tied up in food. Like, my patients now, Kristen and I have continuous glucose monitors on a lot of our patients. So we could see when they mess up, say, what happened on Wednesday at 4:00? What happened here? And it's interesting to me, because a lot of people eat and then they feel guilty. The huge thing that I've seen, and Kristen could add to this, is we've been following our patients every single week. So we could deconstruct what happened. And what I'm shocked by is, it's amazing to me that people will have one night where they eat the wrong stuff, and then they come to the conclusion, I felt terrible the next day. I was hungry all day. I felt miserable. I was guilty. It's like, if you're going to eat the stuff, enjoy it, but learn. And then say, okay, how do I handle this differently? What could we do differently? Oh, I was at the office. I didn't have anything well, maybe we could have food available, or maybe you could fast that day. Or, and they come up with their own solutions, and it's amazing, because, I'll tease people a little bit. They go off the rails a little bit. It's their birthday and they have cake. I go, you're a terrible person, right? Joking. Because it's not, if you're going to do it, and don't feel bad for the next month and make yourself eat bad food to make yourself feel better, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's a drug. So I think that when people see that, they say, oh yeah, I don't want to do that again. And they're making that decision. They go, it wasn't worth it, really. Or logging or journaling how you're feeling. Because a lot of people, what I'm finding is that their mood, anxiety, stress gets better on a low carb diet. I just see it over and over. And people are like, I'm not even hungry. Like, Chris and I had a Zoom meeting and no one was hungry. And they go, I'm not hungry anymore. I don't get cravings. I don't get starving all the time. Some people do, but for the most part, it's that satiety feeling, and that feels good when you feel like the chains are taken off of being hostage to this thing.
Totally. Kristen? And I was just going to say, a lot of my clients kind of say, like, just the low carb reduces a lot of the food drama in their head. Like, there's just less food thinking once you're low carb, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, it's that decision fatigue, right? It isn't as much work trying to figure out what you're supposed to eat, how many calories it is, and everything. Being low carb really is it's pretty easy to follow, and it's a little frustrating when you have these trolls on social media talking about how unsustainable it is when we know that it does a great job of controlling hunger for most people. And if we can address the underlying psychological issues and the comfort issues around food, it really is a very sustainable diet for most people. Maybe there's a few exceptions, but for the most part, I think it works very well. But with any diet, like you pointed out, for physicians that have very high stress jobs, I have an attorney who is really struggling as well. And we see it on his CGM every morning when he gets ready for work. And his workday starts a little later. He's already had the dawn phenomenon. He goes for a walk. As soon as he gets to the office, his blood sugar just spikes. And he's another one. Well, what are we going to do about it? What type of stress relief? How can we change your office environment? And he's one of those who works around the clock and doesn't take any time for himself and does not have a few minutes in his day to take a break. And that's the real challenge.
And you know what? Here's a question I often ask people that I find really helpful is, so say you did take a 5-minute break or a couple 5-minute breaks through the day, who else would benefit from you doing that? Because often we won't, because we feel guilty, right? That other people are depending on us. But when we look at it, when we care for ourselves, other people actually benefit. Like, you know, those clients or patients that you see after you've had a 5-minute break probably are going to have a better experience. Your family, when you get home, if you've had a few breaks, are going to be, you know, you're going to be more there with them. Like, there's a lot of people around us that get impacted by the stress of us not actually caring for ourselves.
That's such a good point. You are more valuable as a caretaker when you're well taken care of. I kind of want to swing back to meditation. It's
Sure.
kind of my new thing these days because it's been so life-changing for me. But the biggest pushback I have against it is people say, "Oh, I've tried it. I just can't get my mind to settle down." I try to tell them it's not about quieting your mind. It's learning how to control your thoughts. How much do you implement meditation into your practice, and how do you instruct your clients on how to meditate?
So I use it lots. Like, as a family physician, I'm often recommending meditation, right? Because I think in general, we, you know, everybody's anxious, especially say through COVID, right? Everybody's anxious. Everybody's got some lower mood to some degree, but we're not taught to actually slow down and take care of ourselves. Everybody's in that hamster wheel. So I'm always recommending meditation. The way I describe it to people is, if they haven't done it, is I recommend that they do guided meditation so that somebody's actually in their ears. Because I think a lot of people try to meditate being just sitting in quiet. And I think that's a fantastic skill, but it might not feel the easiest when you first try it. So I personally use an app called Insight Timer, which I think is great. It's got lots of kid meditations too, so my kids use it at night and stuff. And just then you have somebody in your head. So when your mind goes blah, 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 racing off, which mine always still does, then there's somebody's voice to bring you back. And two, you can set it for a certain length of time. So like what I used to do, I haven't for a while, but I'd have headphones in my desk drawer. So if I started to feel myself ramping up, I would just choose like a 1 or 2 minute meditation, put in my headphones and just sit at my desk and calm down. I think of it as a muscle that you have to train. So I think a lot of us, when we start meditating, we expect it to feel great right away. Same thing as exercise, right? If you haven't been exercising and you want to start, you think you should feel good right away. But really the beginning doesn't feel that great because you have to train those muscles to the point where it actually starts to feel good. And I think of meditation that way, that the mindfulness part of your brain is a muscle that you just need to train. And then the more you train it, the better it feels and the more benefit that you see from it.
Oh, I think that's an excellent point. Because it's hard. It is a muscle you have to train, and it almost feels like an extra task when you first start. But if you hang in there and work it, it'll pay off dividends for sure. Brian.
Yeah, and sorry, I was going to say, when I originally started meditating, and this is still when I do most of it, is I get up early and I meditate in the morning, and then I go for a run, and do some journaling in that time too. And I did it because it was the only time that people were not on top of me, meaning people as my small children. And so it was the only time I could actually be in my house where it was quiet. But that meditation first thing in the morning, I started to see benefits through my day pretty quickly. Even though it was hard to get up early, I got the feedback and the benefit from it pretty quickly, which was really good. And I think it's easier to do it when you haven't started other stuff. It's sometimes harder to stop what you're doing to do meditation than, or for me anyways, it is, than to just kind of do it first before I get going.
I agree. I wake up and it's the first thing I do, journal, workout, and it's a great start to the day. Brian, how about you? What are your thoughts? Are you a meditator?
Yeah. It's funny, and it's kind of sad in a way. My first thing when I wake up in the morning, I'm looking at Twitter to see if I've missed anything, what happened overnight. And the days when I say, okay, I'm going to do, you can call it meditation. I do devotions in the morning. I read a little scripture or someone's positive thoughts, and 10 minutes gets me in the right mindset for the day. And so for other people, it may be meditation, maybe whatever. And I think we kind of think of a lot of this stuff as hocus pocus and crazy, but I'll tell you, as a personal experience, when I had my continuous glucose monitor, my buddy has a go-kart place for kids at his place. And so we went and we raced and we had a great time. And I checked my sugar was like 163, and that's total. I'm usually around 80. I went to church. My buddy said, hey, Brian, let me pray for you and spend some time. And we talked a little bit. And I go, I wonder what my sugar is. I check it, 62. And that's abnormally low for me. But I was just so calm and peaceful. So, there's definite physiologic, if you believe whatever you do, but there's physiologic benefits of just taking that time. Like for me in the morning, just spending 10 minutes with my wife, having coffee and talking about life, I know it makes me in a better place mentally for the day, and just having that time. Because I spent 17 years waking up at 4:30 and leaving while my wife was still in bed, right? So just having that time, I appreciate it. So I think anything like that, if you love petting your dog or spending time with your cat or, collecting rocks, I don't care what it is, find your peace and do what you enjoy. And I think that really helps people to get regrounded, whether it's going for a run in the morning, whether it's activity, whether it's painting, I don't care what it is. But I've seen, as a matter of fact, one of my patients, high stress, high blood pressure, during his physical, he would get 5 phone calls. He was running 3 nightclubs, and I just sensed that how hectic and crazy it was. His wife made him do yoga. He said he was about to lose his mind. He hated it. He was like, I'm never doing that again. She goes, you're going tomorrow again. You're going to go every day until you relax. And now that's his therapy. He goes once or, twice a week, 3 times a week, and he could just have quiet, turns his phone off, doesn't. And I think one thing I learned, and the reason I'm with Kristen in my practice now, a big part of it was Rob Seibis talking about dopamine fasting, like taking a day and just journaling, putting your thoughts down, what's important, because we're so busy. We don't have time to do that. We don't have time to think about, like you were saying, I know it sucks right now, but I don't know what the solution is. I don't know what would be fun. I just know I'm not happy with where I'm at. So I think a lot of times when you reassess those and things, because you know what, where we're at now, I'm happier than I've been in 20 years for sure, or probably since med school, right? Because we're having fun. Chris and I get along and we have fun and we talk about patients and we try to help each other to figure this puzzle out, because no one has all the answers, right? There's different approaches for different people. And I think learning that and actually helping people and seeing them happy, like we almost every day we say, my day was awesome. How was yours? Great. Because we help people, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what you're doing too. And especially with doctors, I do get a lot of joy out of that when I see a doctor, because I know they're going to impact a lot of people.
Yeah. And I think they need us, right? Like, again, from that standpoint of we don't care for ourselves. And yet when we don't care for ourselves, we end up burnt out and less able to care for the patients. Like, doctors need help. They need people that can help and can understand what they're going through and what their life is like. Because I think if you haven't been on that side of the fence, it's a bit hard to picture exactly what all the demands are on a physician's time and attention. And so I think it's hugely beneficial for doctors to have, other doctors that they feel get them and can help guide them through these paths, and help them get back to that self-care piece of it that we neglect. And we're taught to neglect, like med school. I think it's better now, but definitely probably when we all went through, it absolutely taught you to neglect yourself, that there was no time for self-care.
Well, and your family too, right? Because you're studying, everyone else is down there having fun, or they're Christmas and I'm in the hospital, I'm gone for 3 days, don't see my wife, all those things that you sacrifice, you go, this is just what you do. This is just part of it. And so in my mind, I was like sacrificing time with family, friends. I mean, I got called out by good friends that we've been friends since third grade saying, Brian, are you mad at me or something? We haven't had dinner together in 3 years. And you have to look at that and go, man, my job is killing my personal life, right? Friends and support people who've been your friend forever. And you realize, man, I don't have, on the weekends, I need to recharge and recuperate. I don't have time to drive up to Orange County and hang out with people, right? So I think it's all that. We have such a sense of duty that we forget about ourselves and our family and our responsibilities to our communities even. Like now, like just this week, Chris and I went on a huge walk with our patients, and it was a blast. Like you learn, you know them as human beings, not just a problem set. Like we talk about life, what motivates you, what's struggling for you. And we learn, we take that back with us, and we can help the next person with the tools we get. I got to counsel a kid who's struggling with alcohol abuse, and he's not my patient, just as a mentor. Just to have time to breathe into people. That's recharging the batteries. That's why we did what we did, why we're doctors. So I think there's a lot of that where we miss out. I was missing out on that. I'm like, I could be used more. I could be more influential by having time, because time was my most precious commodity, time and health. And we're neglecting both of those as physicians, right? Until we step back and say, wow, where am I? Is it about seeing 5 extra patients that day, working through lunch, working late? Or is it about helping the people you can help and narrowing it down? And I think we've all kind of come to that conclusion that you can't help everyone. Who's just saying that? We were talking about, walking down the beach and you see a bunch of starfish wash up on the beach. You could just grab a few and throw them back in. And people say, well, you can't help them all, but I can help the ones I can help. Right. So sometimes, like when I do medical mission trips, that's exactly what I can help. I can't help everyone there, but I can help the people who come before me. Right. I can breathe into them and try to help them. So we have the greatest career on earth, really, what we can do and what the impact we can have. I don't think of anything that's more rewarding, but I don't think if there's anything that's more damaging also when you sacrifice your life for medicine. And I've seen it. I've seen people do that. They work until they're 80 and then they just die a month later. Right. And they've missed out on life. They have no hobbies. I mean, it's amazing. You talk to doctors, say, what do you do for hobbies? Like sleep. Right. They don't have any outside interest. So they just, and not just doctors, attorneys, people identify with what they do and they sacrifice. I know prosecution attorneys, that it's incredible. Or the DA's office, it's brutal what they do. It's brutal. Like they're working all the time. So I think that just having time to do this, to do a podcast with you, or this is valuable stuff. And I think this is going to reach a lot of doctors and a lot of people out there who are struggling in life.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I leave you guys with one visual that I find really helpful with this emotional eating stuff? So I talk about it as being an iceberg. So what we eat and how much exercise we do would be like what's that pointing out of the water. And that's what, traditional diets have kind of taught us to focus on, is just eat less, exercise more, the stuff that you can easily see. If you're struggling with the stuff that we're talking about, what you need to do is actually look underneath the water, because all the drivers are underneath the water. So they're the things we've been talking about. They're your stress management, how you're thinking throughout the day, how much you're sleeping, what your overall stress level is like, medications even, right? There's so many different drivers that can be under there. And so for an individual, you need to just play a bit of the detective role and know that there's no rights or wrongs. It's just like, okay, let me see how much this is influencing. Like if I wonder if my sleep's influencing my weight, why don't I just go to bed a half hour earlier consistently for a few weeks and see what happens? And approaching it all like a science experiment, I always find helpful, where for an individual, you don't know if a certain change is going to work. You just have to try it and see. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't mean you did it wrong. It just means maybe that's not one of the drivers for you. You just have to try the other ones and keep trying.
I love that visual. It's such a good point. This has just been a wonderful conversation and podcast, so much helpful information. And I think it's great. You are a physician who's trying to help other physicians. It's priceless work and very much appreciated. How do people go about getting in touch with you?
So my website is weightsolutionsforphysicians.ca. So you can head over there. It's getting totally updated this weekend, which I'm quite excited about. But and then my podcast, which is Weight Solutions for Physicians, is on all the different podcasting platforms. So iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, all that stuff. And it's released weekly. So I'm about to do my 100th episode, which means there's tons and tons of information on there, all for free.
Yeah, that's
Great.
awesome.
Yeah, I started listening to your podcast, and I highly recommend it. It's
Thank you.
beyond helpful. So happy you're putting out these resources for fellow physicians.
Yeah, thank you.
In closing, give us some tips for that night eating problem that's a nightmare for everyone. What are some like quick tips that you could give people that they could walk away with and say, yeah, let me implement this?
I think basically you have to look earlier in the day. Like if you're focusing at night and trying not to eat, you're using willpower. And the reality is you don't have a lot of willpower at night. It's kind of been used up. So you need to shift your focus to earlier in the day, either by eating some more, like, higher protein, higher fat foods earlier in the day. So not overeating, but where you're like, yes, I'm satisfied. And if you've been fasting and struggling with evening eating, I would say do a 2-week experiment where you eat breakfast and lunch of a low carb, good quality meal and see what your evening eating does. Because there can be the biological drive. And then what I would suggest is make a list of all the situations that stress you out throughout the day, all the situations that you can kind of feel start compounding, and start writing down what you think when those situations happen. So when the kids don't want to leave the house and you're gonna be late for the bus, that used to be a big one for me. What are you thinking? And when you're starting to get behind at work, what are you thinking? When you're in a traffic jam on the way to work, what do you start thinking? And what you'll notice is how each of these thoughts, like the kids don't want to be on the bus and I think we're going to miss the bus and I don't have time to drive them, stress. Then, get to work and I'm already a half hour late and feeling behind, it's stress, right? And you'll start to see how the patterns happen. And the beauty of it is, if you just intervene at one of them, you'll have ripple effects. So if my very first trigger is the kids not wanting to get ready for the bus, if I start working on my thoughts about that and thinking, you know what, it's fine. If we miss the bus, I'll just drive. The world won't end. Just kind of a calmer thought. It has ripple effects. So then when I get to my office and there's a stack of sticky notes on my desk about things I have to do, I'm less stressed when I get there. So it's not like the compounding effect. And so you don't have to change everything at once. Making small changes will have ripple effects that will ultimately affect the evening eating. And it's so much easier if you can change the stuff earlier in the day where you're just changing how you're thinking about something. And then the urges to eat settle way down.
Great advice, Doc. Thank you so much for joining us. And, everyone, we went a little long, but this is like critical, important stuff. I mean, for us, I think it's medicine for us too. And hopefully this helps you deal better with stress, with life. I think sometimes just getting a new focus, a new outlook, and, that's going to affect diet stuff. I mean, people don't realize sleep, stress, all these things. It's a big picture. It's not the Mediterranean diet. It's a Mediterranean lifestyle. When you wake up not stressed and you don't have to have 20 doctor's appointments and run around like crazy all day. So I think I'm learning a lot. And I think we're all learning a lot that it's okay to just take care of yourself and relax a little bit. A lot of us feel guilty doing that. So take care of yourself and everyone else this week. And thank you for listening. Dr. Key, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, listen to her podcast. We'll have links to everything. It's awesome because we're all growing this community. We're all helping each other and we're seeing the benefits. So thank you very much. Kristen, great. Awesome having you.
Yes, always fun getting to co-host with you and Chiro. Thank you.
All right. Stay out of trouble and I'll see you at the office, Kristen.
Sounds
Thanks
good.
for having me on. It's been super fun.
Thank you. It's always great.
Thank you.